Hi, I'm Tariq Melrose. You ever feel like the people in charge are living completely different realities? Today's press conference confirmed it. While we deal in facts, they deliver theater. While we ask questions, they sell slogans. But here, we do things differently. I watched the whole thing so you wouldn't have to. And trust me, you're going to want to hear what they didn't say. Subscribe now. Let's get into it. Murphy torched Kristi Noem for breaking the law, defying Congress, and gutting constitutional rights in plain sight. Stay tuned for the next clip where we expose more GOP lawlessness and fight for real accountability.
Remarks.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Secretary, thank you for being here. I'm sorry that I missed your call yesterday. I look forward to working closely with you. I say this with seriousness and respect, but your department is out of control. You are spending like you don't have a budget. You're on the verge of running out of money for the fiscal year. You are illegally refusing to spend funds that have been authorized by this Congress and appropriated by this committee. You are ignoring the immigration laws of this nation, implementing a brand new immigration system that you have invented that has little relation to the statutes that you are required, that you are commanded to follow, as spelled out in your oath of office. You are routinely violating the rights of immigrants who may not be citizens, but whether you like it or not, they have constitutional and statutory rights when they reside in the United States. Your agency acts as if laws don't matter, as if the election gave you some mandate to violate the Constitution and the laws passed by this Congress. It did not give you that mandate. You act as if your disagreement with the law, or even the public's disagreement with the law, is relevant and gives you the ability to create your own law. It does not give you that ability. Let's start with your spending. You are on track to trigger the Anti-Deficiency Act. That means you are going to spend more money than you've been allocated by Congress. This is a rare occurrence, and it is wildly illegal. Your agency will be broke by July, over 2 months before the end of the fiscal year. You may not think that Congress has provided enough money to ICE, but the Constitution and the federal law does not allow you to spend more money than you have been given or to invent money. And this obsession with spending at the border, as the chairwoman mentioned, has left the country unprotected elsewhere. The security threats to the United States are higher, not lower, than when before Trump came to office. To fund the border, you have illegally gutted spending for cybersecurity. As we speak, Russian and Chinese hackers are having a field day attacking our nation. You've withdrawn funds for disaster prevention. Storms are going to kill more people in this country because of your illegal withholding of these funds. Your myopia about the border, fueled by President Trump's prejudice against people who speak a different language, has shattered many of this country's most important defenses. Now let's talk about the impoundments. When Congress appropriates funds for a specific purpose, the administration has no discretion as to whether to spend or not spend that money unless you go through a very specific process with this committee. Let me give you two of many instances of this illegal impoundment. The first is the Shelter and Services Program. Senator Britt may want to zero that account out, but that account is funded, and it was funded in a bipartisan way. You don't like the program. Your policy is to treat migrants badly. I think that's abhorrent, but it doesn't matter that you don't like the program. You cannot cancel spending in this program, and you cannot use the funds as you have to fund other things like ICE. You have also canceled citizenship and integration grants, which help lawful permanent residents become citizens, helping them take the citizenship test. I know your goal is to try to make life as hard as possible for immigrants, but that goal is not broadly shared by the American public. That's why Congress, in a bipartisan way, for decades, has funded this program to help immigrants in this country become citizens. Now let's talk about why encounters at the southern border are down so much. This is clearly going to be your primary talking point today. You will tell us that it represents a success. But the primary reason why encounters are down is because you are brazenly violating the law every hour of every day. You are refusing to allow people showing up at the southern border to apply for asylum. I acknowledge that you don't believe that people should be able to apply for asylum, but you don't get to choose that. The White House doesn't get to choose that. The law requires you to process people who are showing up at the border and who claim asylum. Why? Because our asylum law is a bipartisan commitment, an effort to correct for our nation's unconscionable decision to deny entry to Jews to this country who were being hunted and killed by the Nazis. Our nation, Republicans and Democrats, decided, wrote it into law, that we would not repeat that horror ever again, and thus we would allow for people who were fleeing terror and torture to come here, arrive at the border, and make a case for asylum. Finally, let's talk about these disappearances. In an autocratic society, people who the regime does not like or people who are protesting the regime, they are just often picked up off the street, spirited away, sometimes to open-ended detention, sometimes they're never seen again. What you are doing, both the individuals who have legal rights to stay here, like Kilmar Abrego Garcia, or students who are just protesting Trump's policies, is immoral. And to follow the theme, it is illegal. You have no right to deport a student visa holder with no due process simply because they have spoken in a way that offends the president. You can't remove migrants who a court has given humanitarian protection from removal. Now, reports suggest that you are planning to remove immigrants with no due process and send them to prisons in Libya. Libya is in the middle of a civil war. It is subject to a level 4 travel advisory, meaning we tell American citizens never to travel to Libya. We don't have an embassy there because it is not safe for our diplomats. Sending migrants with pending asylum claims into a war zone just because it's cruel is so deeply disturbing. Listen, I understand that my Republican colleagues on this committee don't view the policy the way that I do. My Republican colleagues don't share my level of concern for the way that this administration treats immigrants. That's fine. But what I don't understand is why we don't have consensus in the Senate and on this committee on the decision by this administration to impound the spending that we have decided together to allocate in defense of this nation. We as an appropriations committee, we work interminable hours to write and pass a budget. This budget is really hard to write and pass. And so we make ourselves irrelevant when we allow the administration to ignore what we have decided. And then when we look the other way, when the administration rounds up immigrants who are here illegally and have committed no offenses worthy of detainment, we also do potential irreversible damage to the Constitution. These should not be partisan concerns, destroying the power of Congress, eroding individuals' constitutional rights. This should matter to both parties. Madam Secretary, thank you for being here, and I look forward to your testimony. Thank you. Madam Secretary, one of the accounts that right now is being impounded, I mentioned it in my opening statement, is the Shelter and Services Program. I certainly understand as a program that Republicans, unfortunately, have not supported, but it was a major element of the budget that we passed, and thus far there are somewhere in the neighborhood of $600 million that you have not expended. Can you commit to this committee, understanding that you have the ability to decide how that money is spent and who gets that money within the parameters dictated by Congress, but can you commit to this committee that you are going to spend the money in the Shelter and Services account according to the authorization provided to you by Congress?
Sir, we have followed authorizations and the law and how these dollars are being spent. We are not conducting any impoundment. And as you know, under the previous administration, the Shelter and Services Program was being used to facilitate illegal immigration and shelter for criminals in many areas. And so we are using those dollars to how they were intended by Congress when those dollars were put into that program.
But you haven't spent really any of those dollars other than those that you've reprogrammed. So I certainly know that you do have a right to spend a little bit of time on review, but you do have to spend those dollars. So can you commit to us that you are going to spend the dollars in the Shelter and Services Program on the functionalities and programmatic parameters authorized by Congress?
We're going to follow the authorities that we have under the Department of Homeland Security and the administration for how Congress appropriates funds. Absolutely, we will follow what is authorized and what is the process for how those are traditionally spent.
Madam Chair, my guess is that the administration is not going to spend any of the SSP dollars, that by the end of the year, those dollars will not be spent. And I raise this, I admit that this was a priority for Democrats, and that money was included in the budget in exchange for other funds that were priorities for Republicans. If we now live in a world in which the administration spends down the accounts that were priorities for Republicans and does not spend down the priorities that were priorities for Democrats, I don't know how we do a budget. I don't actually know how we come to an agreement if we live in a world in which the administration doesn't spend the accounts that it doesn't believe in. That would be precedent breaking for this Congress. And so I raise this issue because I think it's very relevant to our work, and I think it will make it virtually impossible for us to do a bipartisan budget if by the end of this fiscal year, the $600 million that are sitting in this account that are supposed to be used to treat migrants to this country humanely are not used. Thank you, Madam Chair.
What Senator Murphy just laid out is a blistering, fact-driven indictment of exactly how the Trump-Noem brand of governance shreds both the Constitution and the rule of law, and why every American, regardless of party, should be alarmed. From the opening moments, Murphy did what too few in Congress have the courage to do: put on the record that the department, under Kristi Noem's direction and Trump's shadow influence, is not just bending the rules, it's openly breaking them. We're talking about illegal spending practices, deliberate violations of appropriations law, and a dangerous willingness to trample the constitutional rights of immigrants simply because the administration doesn't like them. Let's start with the budget. Murphy calls out Noem's agency for being on track to trigger the Anti-Deficiency Act. In plain English, spending money it doesn't have. This isn't a rounding error. It's one of the clearest, most basic violations of federal law a government agency can commit. Congress holds the power of the purse, and when an administration blows through that, it's not just bad accounting, it's a constitutional crisis. And they're doing it while simultaneously refusing to spend funds that have been appropriated for programs they personally dislike, such as the Shelter and Services Program. This is where the hypocrisy hits full volume. Noem's DHS is raiding funds for cyber defense, disaster prevention, and humanitarian services, all to pour more money into Trump's single-minded, prejudice-fueled obsession with the southern border. And while they're doing that, Russian and Chinese hackers are running wild in our systems, and U.S. communities are being left more vulnerable to catastrophic storms. This is a self-inflicted national security breach in service of political theater. Murphy also eviscerates their deliberate impoundment of funds, the illegal withholding of money Congress told them to spend. They're refusing to implement programs designed to help lawful permanent residents become citizens, programs with decades of bipartisan support. Why? Because the administration's political goal is to make life harder for immigrants, even those on the legal path to citizenship. That's not policy disagreement. That's sabotage of the democratic process. And then there's the asylum issue, where the cruelty isn't just immoral, it's illegal. The law requires that anyone arriving at the border claiming asylum must be processed. This isn't a liberal loophole. It's a bipartisan safeguard written in the shadow of one of America's greatest moral failures, turning away Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi genocide. By refusing to process these claims, Noem's DHS isn't securing the border. It's erasing decades of hard-won moral and legal commitments. Murphy doesn't stop there. He draws a chilling comparison to autocratic regimes, where dissidents simply disappear. Under this administration, immigrants who have legal rights to remain in the U.S., including students here on visas, are being targeted for deportation without due process, sometimes explicitly because they've spoken out against Trump's policies. That's not just unconstitutional, it's the stuff of banana republics. And the most grotesque revelation, reports that the administration plans to deport asylum seekers to Libya, a country in active civil war, under a level 4 travel advisory, where even our diplomats can't safely operate. That's not immigration enforcement. That's a death sentence. It's a calculated act of cruelty dressed up as policy. Here's what makes Murphy's statement so devastating. He strips away the partisan framing and gets to the heart of it. This isn't just about left versus right. It's about whether Congress, the elected representatives of the people, still has the power to make binding decisions, or whether an administration can simply ignore laws it doesn't like. It's about whether constitutional rights mean anything when an unpopular or marginalized group is the target. Murphy's warning is clear. If we allow this administration to spend only on Republican priorities while sitting on Democratic priorities, If we accept a precedent where appropriated funds are ignored based on ideology, then the entire budget process becomes meaningless. And if we turn a blind eye to the administration disappearing immigrants, denying asylum, and deporting people to active war zones, then the Constitution itself becomes meaningless. Let's be real. Kristi Noem isn't operating in a vacuum here. This is Trumpism in action. Break the law, weaponize the government against perceived enemies, and dare anyone to stop you. It's about flexing raw power, not governing. And if Democrats and principled Republicans, if any still exist, don't push back with everything they've got, then we're not just looking at another 4 years of bad policy. We're looking at a permanent shift toward authoritarianism. The stakes could not be higher. This is about defending the separation of powers, the rule of law, and the fundamental idea that rights apply to everyone, not just the people the president likes. It's about whether we remain a nation of laws or slide into a nation where the law is whatever the executive branch says it is. And make no mistake, if this becomes the accepted norm, it won't stop with immigrants. Once a president can unilaterally ignore Congress, impound funds, and target disfavored groups without consequence, there's nothing to stop that power from being turned on political opponents, journalists, or any other group that dares to dissent. Senator Murphy did his job today. Now it's on the rest of us to do ours, to demand accountability, to refuse to normalize this behavior, and to make damn sure that in the next election we choose leaders who respect the Constitution they swear to uphold. This has been Tariq Melrose Vlogs, where we cut through the spin, call out the hypocrisy, and fight for a democracy that works for all of us. If you believe in the rule of law, human rights, and the idea that no president is above the Constitution, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video. Because the truth matters, and it's going to take all of us to make it louder than their lies.